Ever wondered how a new medicine actually gets from a scientist's idea to your local pharmacy? It's one of the longest, most expensive, and frankly, riskiest journeys in any industry. So today, we're going to break down that entire process, all 14 steps, into a super clear guide, perfect if you're new to the field.
Now, to help us make sense of all this, we're going to use a simple but I think pretty great analogy. Just imagine that making a new drug is like trying to create the world's most important batch of popcorn. Every single potential drug starts as just one unique kernel. Trust me, this will help us get through some of the more complex stuff.
So here's our roadmap. We've broken this massive 15-year process into 4 main parts. First up, the journey from a lab concept to the very first dose in a human. Then we'll walk through the 3 crucial phases of clinical trials. After that, we tackle the massive hurdle of getting regulators to say yes. And finally, we'll look at what happens to a drug after it's finally on the market.
All right, let's dive right in. Part 1 is all about that incredible and incredibly long journey from millions of ideas in a lab to that one huge moment, the first dose administered to a person.
This first part of the race has 3 major hurdles. First, you've got target identification. That's when scientists figure out the biological bullseye they need to hit to fight a disease. Then comes lead optimization, where chemists basically design the perfect molecular dart for that target. And finally, there's a ton of preclinical testing to make sure that dart is safe before it gets anywhere near a human. And it all starts at a scale that's almost impossible to wrap your head around. Using these amazing robotic systems, scientists will screen millions, literally millions of different chemical compounds. These are our popcorn kernels. They're just looking for any of them that have some kind of promising effect on the disease target.
The filtering process here is absolutely brutal. Out of those millions of kernels you started with, you might only end up with a few hundred hits. And those are just molecules that showed any effect at all. From there, you narrow it down even more to just a handful of promising leads. And that leads to one of the biggest, most high-stakes decisions of the entire journey. After all that work, the team has to pick one single molecule, one development candidate. This is the one kernel that the company is going to bet hundreds of millions of dollars on to carry forward. No pressure, right? So before that chosen one can get to a human, it has to pass a critical safety checkpoint. First, everything is tested in vitro, which literally means in glass. So think cells in a petri dish. You're looking for basic function and any early warning signs. Only if it clears that stage does it move to in vivo studies, testing inside a living organism like a mouse to see how a real body processes it and to hunt for any hidden toxicity.
And as you can see here, the financial risk is just massive. Even for the tiny fraction of compounds that make it this far, about half of them will fail right here in preclinical testing. They might turn out to be toxic in ways you didn't expect, or the body just breaks them down too fast. Either way, the journey's over.
Okay, so you've done all the lab work, all the animal studies. You can't just start giving it to people. No way. First, you have to submit an investigational new drug application, or IND. This is basically a massive data package with everything you've learned so far, and it's your official request to regulators like the FDA for permission to finally begin human trials.
And if the regulators give you the green light, well, now the real gauntlet begins. This is where the drug candidate enters human testing, and it's probably the most challenging part of its entire life, the 3 phases of clinical trials.
And you can just see from this chart how the scale explodes. Step 4, or phase I, starts tiny, maybe a few dozen healthy volunteers. The only question here is it safe? Then step 5, phase 2, gets bigger, a few hundred patients who actually have the disease. Now the question is, does it even work? And finally, step 6, phase 3, is the huge multi-year trial with thousands of patients to prove definitively that this drug is both safe and effective.
I really want to drive this point home. Phase 2 is the ultimate moment of truth. It's often called the valley of death in drug development, and for good reason. About half of all drugs that make it this far fail right here. Why? Because something that looked amazing in a petri dish and worked great in mice does absolutely nothing in a complex human being. It's just brutal.
Okay, let's say a drug has done the impossible. It's survived a decade of research, it's made it through all 3 phases of trials, now it has to climb the next mountain, getting official approval from government regulators. This stage is really about building a mountain out of paperwork. Every single piece of data you've generated for the last 10 or 12 years, all the lab chemistry, manufacturing details, every single patient result from every trial, it all gets compiled into one gigantic submission file.
And I mean, the scale of this thing is wild. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of pages. A team of experts at agencies like the FDA in the US or the EMA in Europe will then spend the next 1 to 2 years picking it all apart. They'll question every little detail, they'll rerun your stats, and they might even fly out and inspect your factory before they even think about giving you an answer.
So now we get to the final part of our story, and in many ways, it's the longest part of the journey. Because once a drug gets that approval stamp, a whole new set of challenges kicks off, from the factory floor all the way to the patient. So after that marathon, after a decade plus of work, you'd think getting that approval is the finish line, right? You've made it.
Nope, not even close. It's actually the start of a totally new race. Now the company has to prove it can make this stuff flawlessly for millions of people, and it has to negotiate with governments and insurance companies to make sure patients can actually get their hands on it.
And this stage is just a massive operational beast. Remember our popcorn analogy? This is where you go from making a small batch in your kitchen to running a giant industrial popcorn plant. You have to build a global supply chain, and critically, you have to monitor the drug's safety forever. It's called pharmacovigilance, basically a permanent safety watch to catch any rare side effects that only show up once millions are taking it.
And then, after all that, comes the final boss, the patent cliff. A drug's patent usually lasts about 20 years from when it was first filed. The second it expires, cheap generic versions can hit the market, and the revenue for that original drug can just fall off a cliff. We're talking an 80 to 90% drop, sometimes in less than a year.
So when you step back and look at the whole picture, it's just staggering. You've got 12 to 15 years of hard work, an average cost of over $2.5 billion, thousands of scientists, doctors, and other professionals, and tens of thousands of incredibly brave patient volunteers. All of it for one single purpose: getting a new medicine to the people who are waiting for it.
And that really brings us full circle. As one drug finishes its long 20-year life, somewhere in a lab right now, another scientist is just starting out. They're looking at a brand new molecule, a new kernel, and they're asking that same powerful question that started this whole process. Could this be the one? Could this be the one that changes everything?